Welcome to First to Follower podcast, presented by Youth for Christ USA. First to Follower aims to address the unique challenges and opportunities youth ministry leaders face today. Through engaging discussions and expert insights, we aim to provide practical guidance, relevant resources, and support for the spiritual formation of youth leaders as they navigate the complexities of reaching and discipling the next generation. I'm your host, Cory Huffman, and I work on the YFC USA Leader Formation team. And on this episode, I'm welcoming on my teammate, Senior Leadership Formation Specialist, Nina Edwards, along with pastor and author, Drew Hyun. Nina Edwards has served in Youth for Christ for almost 38 years, both as part of a local chapter and with the YFC USA National Service Center, currently serving on the Leader Formation team. Drew Hyun is the founder and lead pastor of Hope Church NYC, a diverse church with 3 locations in New York City. He is also the executive director of Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, an organization that aims to transform church culture through the multiplication of deeply changed pastors and leaders. On this episode, I'm chatting with Nina and Drew about the topic of grief. All right. Well, welcome, Nina and Drew. So awesome to have you guys here this morning. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Doing well.
Awesome. We're gonna jump into talking a little bit about your book, Drew, Beautiful, Disappointing, Hopeful, and we're gonna talk about grief specifically, which is just one of the kind of pieces you spend time on in this book. Before we do that, though, I've had some grief since our National Leadership Conference when you spoke, because you kind of called me out, you used me as an example at the conference, and talked about how, Cory, I hate that guy, and he's so annoying, and this imaginary conversation with Jake, and I was backstage, and I just briefly heard my name mentioned, and then someone's like, "Yeah, Drew was using your name," and I went back and watched the video, and I was like, "Whoa, he was kind of coming at me."
Right, I read 1 John, talk about love, and I'm basically, love Cory, right? And then Cory, I see him today, and I'm like, "Yo, Cory, what's up, man? What's up, Cory?" Dap him up. "Hey, good to see you, man. Good to see you, Cory." He's like, "Yeah, good to see you too. How's it going?" He tells me a little bit. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's cool, man." Man, I can't stand that guy. I hate that guy. Gosh, what's his problem?
Anyways, I just want you to know I've been working through that. I think I'm okay.
Yeah, sorry.
It was great. I loved
everybody,
it.
Yeah, no, I think it was a good choice. I'm a good target for that. People seem to have liked that you were coming after me. So, as we jump in, one thing, as I read this, though, we both read this, a great book, really interesting. But I was kind of intrigued because I felt like the way you wrote it, and you can say more about this, but it felt like you were also trying to include non-Christian readers into this as well, like the way you describe certain things. And I thought that was pretty cool. But, just thinking about like maybe someone who has a friend who isn't following Jesus would be able and has questions could share this with them as they're trying to make sense of this kind of broken world. Can you share a little bit about like what was kind of your vision in writing this and thinking about these different audiences? And what did that look like for you?
Yeah. No, thanks for that question. And so glad to be here with you guys. I think a lot of times when people think about like truth and how relevant it is, and even related to our everyday life, I wanted to write something about how I really believe that the Christian faith gives the most compelling vision and understanding of the world that we live in, and especially around the human experience, and that the human experience really involves both beauty and disappointment. And what's interesting, though, is I think that a lot of Christians tend to lean one way or the other as well when it comes to life. They tend to lead into, well, God made everything to be beautiful, and therefore we need to rejoice, and God has redeemed everything, and we need to rejoice all the time. When actually there's this other part of the story within the Christian message and in Christian theology, which is actually there's a whole lot of disappointment in life. And so what do we do with that? And I think because there's a lack of being able to integrate both beauty and disappointment, and as a result, a lack of integrating both gratitude and grief, I wanted to write how I think the Christian message really gives a frame for how to integrate both in ways that hopefully can allow us to be healthy and whole. again, some extremes when it comes to Christian theology is like, no, wealth, prosperity, that's what God has for you. Just think positively. And others might view as like, oh, the world, everything is going to hell and everything is evil and bad. And it's like, no, there's a lot of beauty in the world as well.
Mm.
And so really, I wrote the book in trying to say, both to Christians and non-Christians alike, like, I think that the Christian worldview gives the most compelling vision for how we understand the world and how we're to go about it with our everyday lives and these practices of both gratitude and grief.
Yeah.
And how do we hold both of these things at the same time?
Yeah.
And that's what, I mean, we just had Easter weekend here. And I think that's where, like, there's something so incredible about how Good Friday, like, we don't get to Easter Sunday until we get to Good Friday. And of course, Anne Lamott has that one phrase, we are Easter people in a Good Friday world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that statement there encapsulates so much of what we believe as Christians, that it's full of both gratitude and grief. And so how do we hold both of these things together so that the way that I show up in the world is as a fully integrated human being who can bring the most authentic and hopefully best version of myself, who's not overly kind of happy, joy, nor like in this incredible, like, melancholy, depressive state, but someone who's able to hold both of those together with gratitude and grief together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's a lot there to unpack, and we definitely are planning to dig into that. But maybe before we do that, I would love to maybe just have each of you both take a moment to share a little bit about your own journey with grief and maybe how that's led you to help others in their grief journeys as well. So maybe, Nina, would you maybe start off that?
Sure. So mine is really around grief because of a death, because of losses. Mm-hmm. There's grief for all kinds of reasons, right? I lost my mom 25 years ago. And as an adult, it was very hard, harder than I ever thought it would be. But I kind of felt like, okay, move through it, be a good Christian and follow Jesus and move through it. And then in 2016, for the next 3 years, I lost 3 very close family members, one right after the other. And then a few months after my sister-in-law passed away in 2019, our really good friend, Jerry Wheeler, Cory, passed away. And I had worked with him for 25 years. And at that point, with those 4 losses so fresh and close, I just felt like I was coming apart. And you're not supposed to. You've been following Jesus a long time. And this should be easier than it is. And you know where they are. And all those things that you try to remind yourself of. And so I just thought, I got to lean into Jesus or I'm just not going to make it. And so, I took some time off work, but Psalm 34:18 that says, the Lord is near the brokenhearted and he saves those crushed in spirit. And I just thought, if God is near the brokenhearted, then that must be a good place to be. And that was sort of how I started to go, okay, God must have something for me in this. But it was quite a journey to discover what that is and maybe start to feel like I could integrate my grief into the rest of my life.
Wow.
How about you, Drew? What does that look like for you? What's kind of been your journey in that space?
Yeah, in an interesting way, I think my journey with grief was I wasn't aware that I had grief. Until, and part of it was I grew up in an immigrant background, and part of the immigrant mindset, especially from a Korean American background, coming to the States, like whenever we went through difficult times, it was just never talked about or acknowledged. And it was mostly like the attitude towards any kind of difficulty that happened was, yes, grief and suffering and loss is going to be something that you experience. But the way to get out of it is you just work hard. You just throw yourself into work. So because of that, that was just the story that I learned about how I deal with anything difficult that happens. So I could imagine, like, I grew up in a largely non-Korean neighborhood and was bullied incessantly, called names. Our home was vandalized regularly. And I was just taught to, like, just move on. And meanwhile, I started to internalize a lot of shame around that. Then in college and high school and college was wrestling with a lot of some of the abuse of my dad. He was just a very angry, violent figure. And it just wasn't processed. It was like, yeah, that's just how your dad is. And so that's just how dad is. Just learn how to deal with it, no matter what happens to mom or to us, my brothers and I. And then in college, kind of coming to grips with not only the pain of my childhood and the pain of, my home and my upbringing, but then kind of wrestling with my own kind of anxieties around performance and achievement. And then it would show up in very destructive ways where I got addicted to pornography. And so now, there's all these ways that I'm dealing with pressure and pain and difficulty. And most of it was just to ignore it. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up at a church where the senior leader had gone through his own journey of a faith that on the outside was very vibrant. He was leading a church that was leading other people to Jesus, and miracles were being done, and the church was growing and expanding in various ways. But then he hit a wall in his own relationship and his marriage. And then his wife actually kind of had the wife, Jerry Scazzaro, that's Pete Scazzaro. Jerry Scazzaro had the courage to say, I can't do this anymore, to live in this pretend world as if everything's okay when things are not okay. And that led him through a journey where, which eventually became emotionally healthy discipleship. And it just so happened that I was moving to New York to do an internship at that church, thinking that I was going to learn about how to do ministry and how to reach the poor and how to grow a church and how to preach and all this stuff. And little did I know that he had been on this 5-year journey. And one of the first sessions as part of this internship was to describe your family of origin at the age of 9. And I was just like, what kind of heresy is this? Why are we doing this? I came to learn how to preach and how to reach people. And Pete was like, no, we're going to talk about allowing Jesus into the deepest parts of your story to bring about a healing that you can then bring to others. Wow. And then it was almost like all this stuff started to get unearthed within me about some of the grief that I carried from the racism of my childhood, the pain and the burden of my family of origin. And then it just so happened, when I was 21 years old and I moved to New York, 9/11 happened. So the country is in collective mourning. The world is in collective mourning. Yeah. And then that was the first year as well that people that I had kind of known for a big portion of my life, extended family, started to pass away. My grandmother passed away. An uncle passed away. So there were these moments of now all of a sudden I'm dealing with these things in real time. And I'm like, holy cow, I don't have the resources. Yep. Other than I can keep working, but then I've got all this secret stuff that's bubbling up in my life. Or I've got, all these people around, the city is in shambles. People are leaving their faith because they can't reconcile some of the questions that are how can a good God allow this suffering to exist? Yeah. And some of these things to happen in the city. So in many ways, that was kind of my journey of having it be grief was something that was ignored, sequestered. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden 9/11 happens and I moved to New York. And it's now this emergence of an invitation to look at these pain points in my life, which I never had before. And ever since then, it's been this growing and awareness of gosh, unless I really address these areas of my life, it can easily show up as addictive behavior, show up as displaced anger towards people close to me, or it can, show up in, just workaholism for me. Yeah. So, so that's kind of been my journey.
That's good. Thanks, Drew. And as you share some of those things, and Nina, I know you can speak to this a lot because we work on the leader formation team with YFC with lots of leaders around the country. But and maybe this question for both of you, but maybe start with Nina. How important is it for leaders to deal with their own grief, or to begin to look at? I mean, I lean more toward, as hearing both your stories, I'm probably more like you described, Drew, of someone who's often just not really paid as much attention to my own grief, and being on a team with Nina has been helpful, and others that have over the years kind of challenged me to think that way. I went through the emotionally healthy spirituality class, and that was a great way to lean into some of those spaces where I started to go, I probably need to spend a little more time thinking about some of these things. But maybe why is it important for leaders to take time to maybe pause from the ministry work and those things to look at their own lives and look at their grief? And
yeah. Well, I think it's important for anybody. To look at their own grief, especially leaders, though, because often you're working with people who are grieving. Drew said around 9/11, it was the country that was grieving. We're grieving coming out of COVID still, I think. There's so much grief around us. Yeah. Just, you could stop anyone on the street and ask them, what's your story? And probably grief would come into it. So we're working with, especially in Youth for Christ, teenagers who are grieving, other leaders, other adults. So if you don't kind of look at your own grief and how is Jesus healing me? How am I integrating this into my regular life? It does come out in all kinds of places. Drew was saying that, it comes out in anger and addictions and just emotional unhealthiness that just gets worse and worse and worse. The hardest thing about grief is the only way to deal with it is to grieve. Like, you can't find another way around it. You got to go through it. And that is hard for people to accept. It's like, if I don't pay attention to it, maybe it'll just stay over there. And it just keeps inching closer and closer to your life. So really important to pay attention to it so that you can minister to others, not just for your own sake, but for the teenagers that you're working with too, I think.
What are your thoughts on that, Drew?
Oh yeah. I mean, amen to everything Nina just said. And I can't lead others to where I haven't been myself.
Right.
And so in many ways, part of me has also, because another word that I would also associate with grief nowadays is the word limits. Like, especially now, like the older I get, like, all of life is loss. And and wrestling with all those losses and limits is just part of the human journey. And there's a way that I can respond to those limits or those losses, right? Like, Cory, I know you can probably, I've lost a lot of my hair. And sorry to call that. I don't know why.
It's pretty visible. I'm okay with that one. We're doing it together.
Sorry, I just figured
we're on this journey together. It's okay.
Like, I mean, I just got really excited about something, and I jumped up and down. And I thought I tore my calf, and it was like this moment of just like, oh my gosh, even my body, it's in decay. It's slowly like all the limits of things that I thought I could do. And I realized like so much of life is loss and learning how to deal with loss, until the ultimate loss, of course, is until I lose my life. And different spiritual writers have talked about that reality of the limits and losses that we all experience. And so to be human is to experience loss and to experience limits. And so, so number one, I need to become aware of that instead of thinking that I'm some superhero that will never experience loss, that has no limits, that will never die. I mean, the reality is all of those are just lies. And so what does it mean to actually get in touch with the fundamental human experience of loss? So that I can help others kind of navigate that as well. But first, I need to become aware of that and hopefully have a response or a way of managing through those losses that end up hopefully leading me towards a more redemptive path than a destructive one, kind of like what Nina was talking about.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk about clean pain and dirty pain.
Yeah.
And I found that so fascinating to think about. I got to grieve both of those.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we just say you're grieving if someone died. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Is there a difference in the way you grieve those two?
Yeah, I think for me, and this is again, the Christian understanding of like different kinds of grief that we carry. So the clean pain is, of course, the pain that I cause when it's my fault. And and the reality is when it comes to pain and suffering, first, I need to realize I contribute to that pain sometimes. For instance, I was late for this call. I felt so bad. I was rushing here. I knew I was keeping people waiting. But hopefully there's a humility and a willingness to confess. And this is where confession is such a big thing, because so many people, when it comes to pain that we are responsible for, that compounds grief for others. Like for instance, when I have had a bad day at work and somehow I take it out on my teenage son, who's 14 years old, has nothing to do with him, but I'm short with him because of what someone else on the street said to me, like just walking in New York or on the subway or whatever. Like I need to, first, hopefully, and this is where I think, again, the Christian faith is so instructive and helpful, because clean pain is a willingness first to admit that I contribute to it sometimes. So I need to take ownership of the ways in which my behavior, actions, thoughts contribute to someone else's kind of difficulty and pain. And so I just need to have a posture of a willingness to confess and repent of things. And you see this modeled throughout the scriptures in the life of David and the exhortations for us to confess our sins to one another so that we can be healed in the book of James. And so for me, I just need to be current in that. Otherwise, what ends up happening is I become self-righteous, delusional, think that I'm God's gift to whoever. And when in reality, no, I'm a fallen human being that also contributes to the pain of this world. And moreover, a lot of the pain that I experience sometimes is due to my own decisions. Like my son now, it affects our relationship. And then if I start thinking, oh my goodness, he's persecuting me, as a 14-year-old, it's like, no, well, I contributed to it as well in the way that I treated him as a dad and things like that. So that's clean pain. And then, that's dirty pain. I had it mixed up. Dirty pain is that sort of pain. And then clean pain is, of course, the pain that comes to me when I've done everything right and the way that the world has fallen and people, human beings are broken. And clean pain, then pain that I have no control over, and learning how to lament that before God and hopefully leading me towards greater humility, greater brokenness, greater a sense of holy unknowing, and hopefully just greater compassion for others. Like, some of the pain that you were describing, Nina, about just the pain of loss of people that you love. And, I could imagine you were doing everything right. And for people around you to lose the people around you that you love, like that's part of clean pain that we don't understand. And I don't understand. But it's interesting. Again, the scriptures are full of both of those things, responding to dirty pain with confession and repentance, and clean pain with just humility and vulnerability, and hopefully a willingness to surrender to a God and trust in his love. Both of those have different parts that are hard to do, right? It's hard for me to respond to dirty pain with confession and repentance. And it's hard for me to respond with humility and vulnerability with pain that comes to me. And I feel like, God, I've done everything right. And still there's all these questions.
And you may never get that person who's hurt you. They may never apologize. They may never even realize what they've done.
Yes.
And so can you just carry it around forever? Or is there a place where you go, okay, I do need to grieve this, even if I never get this, reconciled with them personally.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was sharing in the book about how my dad, I mean, here's how this works, right? So like my dad felt like I was so angry at him, carried all this grief, went to therapy, started getting in touch with all this anger inside.
Yeah.
Then I felt this righteous indignation, or I thought it was righteous, to set my dad straight. So then that led me on a path where every conversation with my dad, I was trying to correct him. And I was and in sometimes kind and sometimes unkind tones, I would be like, Dad, do you realize how much pain you've caused? And it would lead us into these cycles of fights and being disowned and not talking to each other. And then it finally dawned on me, the serenity prayer, which is often said at Alcoholics Anonymous and in other settings, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I remember my dad, remember when that finally clicked in? It was after years of, here I was, thought I was healthy, but really I was using my pain, my own grief, as a sword against my dad. And I was trying to change him, which, can't change anyone. Only God can do that. Yeah. And so but that final realization led me to oh my gosh, I can't change my dad. Let me just begin to release that. What are the things that I can change? I can change the way that I treat my dad, the way that I listen to him, the way that hopefully I can speak to him far more respectfully. And when that changed, it ended up changing the texture of my relationship with my dad. And it was just one of those things that I realized after many years, oh my gosh, this is where hurt people. Yes. My grief ended up multiplying. When I thought I was grieving, I was actually multiplying my grief by how I treated my dad, until I was able to just deal with that grief in a way that I could release it in this powerless, forgiving way, kind of like what you said, Nina. Yeah. And then being able to treat it. And then crazy is my dad and I, our relationship's the best it's ever been, because, and in a strange way now, as he experienced that from me, he's been far kinder and loving and gentle, and it's really been and I'm not saying that happens to every acrimonious relationship. It's just what happened for me, where I realized, oh my gosh, my method was basically trying to deal with my grief over my childhood with trying to correct him and judge him, and it ended up making things worse, and got into a cycle of further hurt and quote unquote violence towards one another.
It's another reason to deal with your grief.
Yes.
Yeah. But the problem is that it's hard to do those things, it's that upside down nature of Jesus, where, our nature is that you want to have this righteous, no, you got to change, or you got to do this. But the answer, while simple, or can be simple, of no, you got to change your own heart, I think is really hard, which you touched on in talking about the balance, or the, not just focusing on the beauty or just the hard stuff, but how do we mix those two? And I think, again, that to me, that feels like a big question right now in our culture, especially Western culture, where it feels like a lot of people and a lot of Christians even don't want to wade into those spaces that are the hard work and that grind of making it happen. But it's important. And that does feel like those are the spaces when you can push through and continue to dig in, where you get to experience Jesus in bigger ways, kind of like Nina, like you were saying about God meeting us in that brokenness. Maybe to touch on that a little bit though, what are some ways that you see the intertwining of, both seeing God's beauty and having hope, but also at the same time dealing with our own grief and the hurt and pain that's around us? And either of you, how do we live that way, or how do we take steps to be able to live that way?
For me, it was so important. Drew alluded to this, the idea that deep joy and profound grief can exist in the same heart. And that, I don't know why I didn't really understand that before, but it was pretty refreshing and new to me, that just because I can find joy doesn't mean I'm not grieving, or that I don't miss people, or that I don't wish a situation was different. And so I think we have to remind ourselves a lot of that Jesus sits with us in that. He doesn't kind of go, okay, I see you're sad. You'll feel better tomorrow. I mean, he's sitting in it with us, and he sheds tears too. And so knowing that he's right there with me helps me to go, okay, I feel this grief in this way today, and I'm going to sit with it. And now I'm going to go on in life, and I'm going to move forward. And some days grief comes in very quietly, and, almost like a person that comes in your house and just sits down and you hardly notice them. And then sometimes it comes flying through the door, and it's unexpected, and it's big, and it feels overwhelming. And just realizing that there are all those different kind of moments, and they can exist with joy and gratitude also. And often when you try to be grateful, it leads you into kind of sitting with the grief in a better way, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking of Nina, as you were sharing. I heard John Ortberg. He was talking about how gratitude and grief are like two faucets that are running at the same time.
Yeah,
and how, and honestly, that's how the Psalms read. The Psalms are constantly full of both gratitude and grief at the same time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Jesus who's able to hold together so many different emotions. You see this in John 11, you see this with even just Jesus, the folks that he would be around, and being both a friend of sinners and being someone who's, attracts children and at the same time can be confrontational, be sad and grieving and weeping over Jerusalem. And so Jesus is able to hold together all of these things. And I think he shows us what it means to be a fully formed, high functioning human being.
Yeah.
And it's holding together all of these different aspects. What's hard is I think our culture can tend to cause us to neglect these things, or to keep ourselves so busy from these things, and then lead us down rabbit trails of, in some ways, disconnecting us from our humanity. And so I do think it's holding together. And for me, it's as simple as asking questions routinely about who and what am I grateful for, and then what do I need to confess and repent of, and then what am I, mad, sad, and anxious about. It's just the simple act of writing those things down, or showing up in different conversations and having those be the topics that we talk about as a community. And certainly something that I share with my wife or with trusted people in our community.
Yeah. And we live in a culture that doesn't allow people to grieve, or doesn't allow it for very long. And so it's like, okay, we had the memorial service, you're better. Or I know you got divorced and that was sad, but it's been 6 months. So it's like, we don't allow people to have the space to really grieve and sit with that. And it's just a journey. I mean, all of life is so messy.
Yeah.
And following Jesus is such a journey. And so why would this be any different? I mean, it's going to take time and space.
Oh, totally. So something happened a few years, 2019, my wife, she had she got rushed to the ER, and then it had to have 3 emergency surgeries. And she was the most pain I've ever seen her in my life. And at the time we had a little toddler at home, and I remember riding in the ambulance to the ER. My wife is in excruciating pain with our little toddler. And it was one of the scariest kind of moments for me. And so then my wife, she's trying, we're trying to figure out what's wrong. Like I mentioned, she had to get moved from different hospitals here in the city. And then I remember I immediately went into super dad mode. So I remember I was like, okay, Tina's, she's on the mend. We're going to try to figure things out. And then our two little kids at the time, I just went into super dad mode, was like, okay, I'm going to take care of their schedules, drop-offs, pickups, like everything. And I remember like 5 days in, she was at her second hospital. And then one night, my kids, so I don't have a vast repertoire when it comes to food. So I was like, and they were just like, oh, I don't want to eat any more broccoli, And I just lost it. I was like, I can't, what? You don't want to eat this broccoli? Do you realize like what's happening right now to your mom and like how hard I've been working? And they were they were so young at the time. And I was just like, so my daughter must have been 3 and my son was 7. And I was like, how could you complain about this? I can't believe how spoiled you're being right now. I'm like, letting him have it. And I remember they were just like so shocked. They were like, where did this come from? And I was shocked and I was crying by the end of it. And they were just like, what's wrong? And I was like, oh my gosh, I need help. And I remember talking to a mentor of mine who connected me to trauma therapists. And of course, like, tracing back the trauma, like I was in the middle of this trauma with my wife. And my immediate impulse was, again, like, work hard.
Yeah.
It'll fix it.
I can fix it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And be super dad. That's what the family needs right now. Now, on one hand, it was admirable. But on the other hand, it ended up being something where, because I wasn't dealing with it appropriately, I wasn't grieving. I wasn't noticing. I just went into this workaholic mode. And then I ended up having to see a trauma therapist for a bit to realize, oh my gosh. And here I was. And by the way, at that point, I had been in the emotional health journey for 18 years.
You should have known everything.
Yeah. Here I was thinking I was some expert and like, oh my gosh, like it was rearing its ugly head, this temptation to ignore my grief. And it ends up hurting the people closest to me.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
And Nina, you had mentioned, just talking about that idea of, when you're still grieving, but everybody else is kind of moving on, and I've seen that. I've experienced that a little bit, and I feel like I've been on the other end, both sides of that. What would you guys say to maybe, what are some ways that people who, especially people in ministry who might have, kids or congregants or maybe it's just friends or family who are going through hard times of grief, and maybe it's even down the road a little bit. What are ways that people can maybe support them or help them? Because I do think that's something that, I found myself at times being like, what do I say? What do I do? Should I check in, or is that just going to open the wound again, or is that, like you just don't know what's the appropriate way or where to start if you haven't been there. So what are some ways that maybe people can just be mindful and be able to be helpful and caring to folks who are grieving, maybe even a ways down the road?
I just think presence is so important. Just show up, like sit on their sofa. If they don't want to talk, that's okay. You're still sitting there, show up with a meal, show up. Don't wait to be asked. There's that phrase of, if you need anything, call me. People who are deep in grief can't even think about what they need to call somebody. Just like you were saying, Drew, all of a sudden I realized, I might need help. But it's hard to get there when you're deep in grief, and it's hard to ask for help. And so show up, I think, is the most important. And people want to talk about their people. So if you're talking about a loss from death, they want to share stories about their people. They would love to hear you say, I remember when they, if you had a relationship with them. So I think sometimes we're afraid, like, I won't have the right words to say, or if I bring it up, I'll make them sad. They're already sad. So show up, talk about their people, be available. Just think of things that you could do to serve them. And I always say, people in their first year of grief, they get a pass, because for however they treat you, I give them a pass, because anger is going to come out, and there's going to be times when they're not going to return your call or your text, or you're going to ask them to come over and they're going to say, no, I can't, and I just say, let's give people, especially in that first year where it's so fresh and deep, a pass in how they treat you.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, that is so good. I mean, and along with presence, I think comes like being able to attune.
Yeah.
And this is where hopefully like, being like learning how to be a safe presence. I know that in our emotionally healthy relationships course, we have this skill called incarnational listening, which is a skill about how to be present and attuned to someone, which I think is an incredible kind of gift that I continue to need to learn, just so I can enter into someone else's world.
Yeah.
And then asking questions, but I love, I think what you said, just presence and attunement makes such a massive difference for folks. So it's amazing because like even in the scriptures, grief and joy, all these things were collective kinds of enterprises, but in today's culture, things are more and more individualistic and we think we have to do things on our own.
Yes.
Or we have to hire someone to do it, so that we can finally talk to them. But really, a community goes such a significant way, which is why the work that you all are doing with young people and what you're cultivating in communities is so important at YFC.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too, even that idea of just being present. Like I think about the things in life that bond people together. There's the good, joyful things, and you do remember those things. But I feel like those aren't as significant as when you're in a hard thing together and you bond through just being together through those grieving kind of spaces. So I do think that piece of community and being willing to sit in it with each other is, it's so important. Drew, you mentioned earlier as we were talking, when you were sharing your story a little bit or sharing why you wrote the book, that the question that sometimes people bring up of, how can, you're talking about 9/11, how can God allow this kind of evil, allow these hard things? That's kind of come up recently for me, not me personally, but actually somebody I was thinking about who is going through some grief. And I was like, I think they would enjoy this book. There's a lot of things in here that it feels like would touch on what they're experiencing. Literally last night, I was talking to this friend and she has parents that aren't walking with Jesus. And she is, she's got a lot of grief about that. And her mom has been slowly, kind of asking some questions and is taking a few steps of being a little bit interested in God. And but that's one that she said has come up, like, how can God allow these evil things or these bad things to happen? And she's experienced some grief or some hard things in her own life. And there's a part of me that wonders if maybe for someone who's asking that question, if there's a question below the question that's tied to their own fear or grief or anxiety or different things. But I imagine you have people ask you that question, often. But how do you respond to someone who asks that question about, like, where's God in this? Or how does God allow evil or pain or all these different things? What's the way that you approach that with folks?
Well, I'll start by sharing a story, because when I was in college, I was like Mr. Bible answer man, apologetics person. Like once I went all in on faith, I was someone who and I started studying about, philosophy, theodicy and the problem of evil, and, a cumulative case for the existence of God, and then the existence of evil, and how do we deal with those kinds of questions. And in other words, like, so much of like apologetics was of the mind and having an answer for people. Yeah. And I remember a mentor of mine shortly after 9/11, he said to me, he said, Drew, how would you respond to someone who said to you, I can't believe in a God who would allow 9/11 to happen? Mm-hmm. And immediately all these kind of arguments started kind of popping up in my mind, and I was about to respond. And he says to me, he goes, Drew, knowing you've got all these philosophical arguments that you've already kind of prepped in your mind. And he said, but you would have failed to realize that the person that asked you the question was someone who believed in God until they lost their sister during the attacks of 9/11. Wow. And I remember that struck me, because it was like, oh my gosh, yeah, like there's so much of and this is where I think, even though people might have questions, and you were talking about the question behind the question, and this is where the skill of attuning and asking questions and listening and being a healing presence that can listen with people is one of the most underrated but most effective skills. Because it allows us to be with people and to hear more of their story, to hear what really is the question behind the question. But the problem is in our, especially in evangelical circles, like I often say I took 2 semesters worth of preaching in seminary, and I took no classes on listening.
Oh.
No wonder the church is known for being such good talkers, and is known honestly as being judgmental and hypocritical, because we're so used to talking and telling what we believe. And again, this goes back to that skill of listening. And so usually if someone asks that question, I really just want to understand where they're coming from. And normally I'll say, like, it's true. I can't even believe sometimes that a good God would allow this to happen. But let's say God doesn't exist. The evil still exists. And I'm curious, how would you respond? Even if you don't believe in a God, like how do you respond to evil? Because at some point, all of us as human beings have to have, I think, some way of coping with what happens with evil in our world. How do we respond? How would you respond? So normally I'm usually asking questions because, again, I do think that the most compelling understanding of the world, including all of its beauty and disappointment, does come from a Christian frame. And it gives us the resources, and the ultimate resource is, of course, Jesus, a God who suffers on our behalf. Like, oh my gosh, like what if I were to concoct a God? I wouldn't even concoct a God like that. I would want someone who's all powerful and on which he is, but a God who actually comes in the flesh and suffers with us and for us on our behalf. Like, that is just a crazy, amazing, miraculous story. And that's why I find it so compelling. But before I would even get there, I would basically just want to ask as many questions to get behind the question that's behind the question, like you mentioned. And then even ask the question, like, I have a hard time understanding this sometimes. I would like to hear from you. Like, how do you cope with it without believing in God or believing in God? How are you coping? Like, I would love to learn, because any resource that helps in terms of dealing with pain and suffering and evil and grief is something that I want to learn more from.
Yeah. And just the idea, I think sometimes we're afraid to admit there's some mystery in being a follower of Jesus, and we don't know everything. I don't get it all. But it's okay, because along with the mystery, we get hope. And hope is so important when you're grieving. And it's something that it's the first thing I think people, like, I can remember a neighbor of mine who I'd been having conversations with about Jesus for a while, and she had just lost her mom. And she said one day, I feel so hopeless. And I said, I get that, but I have hope for you. And I can have enough hope for you right now in this situation until you find more hope. And I remember one day I was outside and she yelled to me from her backyard, do you still have hope for me? And I was like, yeah, Jesus and I still have hope for you. So it's just this gift of hope, but along with it comes a mystery and some suffering. And all of it wraps together in this beautiful Savior who knows what it's like to suffer and be with us in that.
It's really good. It's a good reminder to me, that even especially speaking with someone who's grieving or in pain, that you might have the right answer technically, but without kind of listening, without a humble posture, that answer might be really hollow and might not be helpful, So I think that's good. It's really good from both of you guys. Obviously, we don't just live in the grief space. There is the beauty, there is the hope. Drew, I don't want to just talk about your book in only this one little spot. So what are some things you would maybe say that, like, as this connects to, the hope and as well, just so we're in the grief and that's important. but how does it all connect together a little bit?
I mean, yeah, for me, it's in the Christian story, we get to hold all of it together. Yeah. Gratitude, grief, and grace. And so what it means for me in my own personal life is I'm hopefully someone who holds on to all of these different emotions and experiences and is able to do it ultimately in a gracious way, to be someone who receives grace from God and gives grace to others. And so, and it really does culminate in the person of Jesus, like Nina was saying. So, and, yesterday was Easter, of course, and we were talking about it yesterday at our church communities about, like, what does it mean to hold on to resurrection hope? And what's crazy is that Christianity was still a persecuted religion for 280 years after the resurrection. Yeah. It was so, like, it's crazy. The only thing that explains it is that people really believe Jesus rose again from the dead, because and I was just explaining, this July 4th is going to be 250 years since the Declaration of Independence was signed. Mm-hmm. And what's crazy is I think of Declaration of Independence as that's ancient. That's like ancient. There's less time between the Declaration of Independence to today versus the time that the Christian church was persecuted for being seen as like these Christians who had no idea what they were talking about. But yet somehow the Christian faith spread and grew because they really believed that Jesus resurrected from the grave. They would even die for their faith, believing. And that kind of hope is that is some crazy hope. That is some crazy being able to live with gratitude and grief. And that is just some crazy enduring, persevering, never giving up, always believing that ultimately God is writing his story kind of hope. So I think holding on to that is just an extraordinary gift that hopefully I can hold on to gratitude and grief at the same time. Yeah.
I like the way you talked about Holy Saturday in your book, and it was sort of the in-between of the grief and the pain of Good Friday and then what happens next. Yeah. And that's sort of where we live, right? Where we have hard things and then we kind of go, what happens tomorrow? And we live in this in-between a lot. And are we going to cling to Jesus in the in-between?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Well, what are some, maybe as people are listening and going, okay, I have grief I'm dealing with in some big ways, or I have a close friend or family member. Are there a couple of resources you guys might both recommend? I mean, obviously, Drew, you can promote, some of the emotionally healthy discipleship. I know that does a lot of great stuff. I know, Nina, you've led grief groups and different things, but what are maybe some first steps of spaces people can look to for resources? And we can obviously post this stuff in our show notes too.
Drew, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I help lead an organization called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. And as part of our Emotionally Healthy Discipleship course, part 1, which is Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, we have a couple of weeks worth of not only Bible studies, but also practices around journeying through the wall, which is like the dark night of the soul. And secondly, enlarging your soul through grief and loss. And so those 2 weeks really address this. And then in addition to that, just me, very simple practice that I have is not only asking, Kura, what am I grateful for each day, but I also take the time to ask the questions, what do I need to confess and repent of before God and appropriate others? And then there's an exercise that we have in our Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, which I also ask regularly, which is we call it exploring the iceberg, which is just becoming current of what's happening. And the easiest way for me to remember is, what am I mad, sad, anxious, and afraid, or glad about? So those 4 questions, what am I mad, sad, anxious, and glad about? So those questions, those are things that I ask myself pretty much every day, just so that I can stay current, as if I'm writing a psalm every day. So, yeah.
I have a book called I don't have it. I didn't write it, but Understanding Your Grief, which we can put a resource for that I use when I lead grief groups. I would say people first find somebody who you trust and just sit with them and talk about your grief and start to get it out instead of hiding it or pushing it aside, that kind of thing. It's a great first place to start. You can find grief groups in your area. If you're with Youth for Christ, we have a grief class online in our online resources that I put together to kind of talk about. It's very introductory and sort of working through your own grief, and then how do I walk with other people in grief. So that's a great resource for our Youth for Christ leaders if they're not aware of it as well. But yeah, I mean, the first step really is saying, and I remember this very well, I don't think I'm going to make it if I don't talk to Jesus about this and some other people. So that's a great place to start as well, is just, I've got some work to do in my grief.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Nina. Well, cool. Well, Drew, we talked about this beforehand, and we've, in our episodes, our podcast, we try to end with a little like reflection or challenge or prayer. Would you be able to take a moment and just lead us in a little bit of a practice reflection around this topic?
Yeah, sure. I will. How about I just lead us through those questions that maybe you can just reflect on these questions yourself. Well, the first question is, what do I need to confess or repent of before God and appropriate others? And then the questions of, what am I mad about? And the next question is, what am I sad about? Third question is, what am I anxious or afraid about? The final question is, what am I glad about? And the secret sauce of asking and journaling these questions is sharing it with another human being, kind of like what Nina was saying. So,
yeah. Good.
Well, thank you, Drew. That was awesome, and encourage folks to hopefully take part in that. And we'll have some resources posted. And again, I would encourage people to get Beautiful, Disappointing, Hopeful: How Gratitude, Grief, and Grace Reflect the Christian Story. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Drew, for joining us today. And this was really, really good, really rich conversation.
First to Follower is a podcast from Youth for Christ USA. The views and opinions shared by hosts or guests are their own and don't necessarily reflect the official positions of YFC or any partnering ministry. This podcast is for encouragement and general information only, and it isn't meant to provide legal, medical, mental health, or theological advice. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe. And if you would like to learn more about how to get connected with Youth for Christ in your area, visit yfc.net.